Snow lays a velvet silence over the Walmart lot, swallowing sirens, swallowing footsteps, swallowing the last heat from a dog's lungs. Juno's breath leaves in ragged puffs that crystallize mid-air, the vapor breaking into glitter and vanishing before it knows warmth. Sodium vapor light stains the ice, a bruised amber. A grapefruit bulge clamps her neck like a parasite crown, each swallow a negotiation, each heartbeat a quiet riot. Tires hiss past as if winter itself were an assembly line. Far off, a cart rattles loose, clanging like a warning bell for a ship that will not turn. She lowers her head to the blacktop that leaches heat with a thief's patience. Somewhere inside the taut drum of her abdomen, 6 small tides keep their own time, blind and insistent. She waits without language because language requires a listener. The snow listens poorly. The light does not listen at all. The body learns to bargain with indifference. Boots appear at the edge of vision, leather dark as wet bark, laces bitten white with salt. The stance suggests hesitation, perhaps pity rehearsed and abandoned. The body hovers in the liminal space between impulse and permission, then tilts forward into motion. The counting begins because grief demands arithmetic. One more human rehearses their exit, posture sharpened by cold, eyes flattened by hurry. 47 passerbys becomes a weather pattern, a front of human silence moving through town, depositing a film of frost on everything it does not touch. From the edge of the lot, a trash bin accepts offerings more tender than this living creature receives. Air burns at 15 below. The lungs file a complaint the heart cannot process. Juno registers the boots the way a shoreline registers a retreating wave. Brief indentation, no rescue. Somewhere, a store door sighs and closes. The number hardens into a verdict. The world is busy. The world is always busy.
A different rhythm interrupts the metronome of neglect. Knees take the weight of a decision and find the ground colder than memory promised. Eleanor Harlow's breath lifts in 2 pale banners, both frayed. Arthritic ache blooms where winter keeps its trophies, yet the hands that once threaded IV lines remember their choreography. Fingers test pulse through ice-matted fur, seeking the steady drum that insists existence continues even when the world declines to notice. A tremor crosses Juno's flank like a small earthquake correcting the map. Eleanor inventories injury the way a nurse inventories supplies: tumor circumference, rib visibility, capillary refill, the tyranny of numbers dressed as care. On the periphery, headlights smear into white serpents. The lot feels like a waiting room that ran out of magazines. The choice arrives as a quiet sentence written behind the eyes. Someone must be first to refuse the weather of indifference. Someone must become shelter. The body says yes before the mind finishes. Static bruises the eardrum while bureaucracy arranges its furniture. Words spill through the receiver, tasting of coffee and apology. Estimated arrival times extend like winter shadows, 45 minutes expanding to a geography nobody here can cross. Clocks show their teeth. Eleanor's voice adopts the cadence of a triage note, compressing urgency into syllables that will not dramatize. Temperature, respiration, visible mass encircling trachea, pregnancy, late term, estimated litter, 6. The line replies with policy. The wind replies with teeth. Phones conclude conversations. Emergencies continue behaving like themselves. Eleanor scrolls through searches, summoning names of rescues she has never needed until this second. A stranger's voicemail becomes a confessional. In the trunk, An emergency blanket waits like a promise she forgot she made. Fabric slides beneath a dying animal and makes a small nation of warmth where none existed. The lot becomes a tent, a vow, a refusal to align with the math of delay. Wool meets fur, and a tremor calms beneath the weight of intention. The body learns that heat can arrive disguised as cloth, and trust can arrive disguised as hands. Eleanor's mind punctures the snow and falls through decades, back to monitors beating in fluorescent rooms, back to a bed where a younger body labored toward an impossible fork. The face of a doctor she never forgave floats like a light at the end of an anesthetic tunnel. Somewhere, a husband's grip leaves a bruise that becomes a map. She remembers the sentence that took her daughter and left her breathing. She remembers the silence afterward, the kind that rewires a calendar. The blanket becomes a bridge between past and pavement, between a life preserved and a life pleading not to end at asphalt. She cucks edges beneath a ribcage built for running and now conscripted to endure. The snow keeps falling, indifferent. She keeps tucking, defiant. Metal chills the fingerprint, a small coin of history corroded until names become hieroglyphs. Letters, once sharp as decisions, have surrendered to the cuisine of weather. The hole in the tag is worn to an oval, evidence of years pulling against leashes, years of being led and leading, years that might have contained meadows and kitchen floors and the particular sunshine of belonging. Eleanor holds the tag to the light, as if literacy could be coaxed from oxidation, as if rust were a dialect she could finally learn. The color creaks with the stiffness of neglect. Identity remains, but proof mutated into rumor. She imagines a hand buckling this leather for the first time, the promise implied by the gesture, the failure implied by the state of it now. The wind moves the tag against the collar, a tiny metronome tapping out the remainder of options. Nettle clicks. Time ticks. Fate thickens. The blanket tightens again.
Headlights carve the snow like scalpels opening a night that refuses consent. Tires crunch into a stop that sounds like relief admits defeat. A door closes with medical punctuation. The voice on the air is warm without apology, method without haste. Dr. Isaac Monroe steps into the weather as if trained by every winter the valley has ever thrown at a body. His bag swings like a miniature lighthouse, antiseptic and hope stitched into its seams. He kneels without the choreography of heroics, simply gravity acknowledging a patient. Instruments clink. Light halos the tumor with clinical cruelty. Microchip scanner hums and beeps, the sound of civilization when it remembers to be kind. In the reflection on the scanner's plastic, Eleanor catches her own face, older and somehow newly born. The van idles, offering the small luxury of a future measured in degrees Fahrenheit warmer than this. Juno's eyes, dark and oceanic, accept the possibility of tomorrow. The scanner speaks twice. The second beep twists the roomless space between bodies into a corridor of questions. Two numbers print into Isaac's palm, each a breadcrumb leading to different kitchens, different voices saying, "Come, stay, heal." Identity splits like ice underfoot, cracking toward two shores. Eleanor imagines living rooms and uniforms, garden photos and training fields, a dog who learned to read the weather of breathing and the weather of commands and then learned the weather of being discarded. The database returns addresses that share a city but not a story. The animal on the blanket is both and neither, composite of love and utility and something that failed enough to be exiled to commerce's edge. Outside, a shopping cart slews into a drift like an abandoned ship. Inside, the van becomes ark and ambulance. Isaac writes numbers that look like coordinates to a lost country. Juno blinks slow acceptance. The snow approves no outcomes, only motion.
A head settles into a cupped hand, weight transferring with the ceremony of oaths. The tail attempts a treaty with exhaustion, a small metronome clicking between surrender and insistence. Eleanor feels the old circuitry fire, the synapse that told her when a patient would choose to live, even as their organs negotiated other terms. Heat leaks from her palm into Juno's cheek, which is the cheek of a child, which is the cheek of a nation that no longer names its heroes. Trust arrives not as a banner, but as a muscle relaxing. The van's interior warms toward survivable. The tumor's shadow sits like a third presence, a chaperone that will not leave. Isaac's notes become architecture. The microchips become doors. Outside, boot prints fill with powder until they look like no one ever stood there. Inside, breath finds a rhythm less like drowning. The blanket breathes with them. The decision has already decided them. The sliding door hushes shut, a lid on a jar that once contained winter and now contains a chance. Street lamps smear into comets as the van joins the arterial flow of the waking town. Snow shows its seam lines where plows suture roads back together. Eleanor watches the lot shrink in the rear window until it becomes a rumor. The blanket rises and falls with a steadier thesis. Isaac's hands on the wheel interpret ice, his jaw set to a weather forecast no one asked for. In the reflection, Eleanor's eyes perform their first unclenching of the day. Ahead, the clinic's rectangle glows like a rational miracle. Behind, retail signs lose their boastfulness and look suddenly like alibis. The diagnosis approaches like a city limits sign. The air tastes of metal, then antiseptic, then possibility. Juno sleeps for 30 seconds that feel like inheritance. The tire treads write a brief poem the wind erases kindly.
Fluorescence interrogates without malice. White walls pretend to be neutral and succeed only at magnifying pulse. The smell of bleach is an oath and a threat, promising cleanliness, implying everything that required it. Juno is lowered onto steel that remembers other bodies. Sensors adhere like small, cold truths. Eleanor takes the plastic chair designed to remind families of humility. Isaac's staff moves with the choreography of practiced emergencies, instruments producing a minimal symphony in stainless steel. The tumor reveals itself under calibrated light as a thing that learned the vocabulary of conquest. Eleanor notes vitals out of old habit, teaches herself to count again with different stakes. The clinic becomes a stage for a play that will not allow intermission. Time elongates, the second hand drunk on its own authority. Somewhere, a coffee machine rinses its throat. Fear sneaks in not as panic, but as arithmetic, tallying scenarios no one has funded yet. Language sharpens and then wounds. Lymphoma lands with a softness that makes the cut cleaner. Staging metrics carry the false comfort of categories. Numbers produce a map of a terrain that refuses to be charted. Diagrams plume on a monitor, elegant, merciless. Eleanor recognizes the cadence of bad news, that careful spacing of syllables professionals learn to cushion freefall. She has worn that voice. She has hated that voice. Now it becomes a mirror angled at her own bones. Isaac points not to probabilities, but to procedures. He holds risk like a fragile heirloom, something to show, but not drop. The ultrasound blossoms with 6 bright interruptions, small lights insisting the body hasn't surrendered all its vows. Eleanor calibrates grief to make room for awe. Diagnosis becomes a fork in an unpaved road. Doors appear that require currency she has in memories and in dollars. She arranges both on an invisible table and counts.
Statistics arrive with an attitude, lean and unsentimental. 8% looks like a coin flipped and caught by a wind, determined to collect its own taxes. The list of applications unfurls, scroll of ifs and maybes, a bureaucratic poem written by biology. Eleanor hears it all and translates to heartbeat language. Risk of blood loss, risk of losing the 6 heartbeats that glow like embers, risk of a silence that would make the Walmart snowstorm look garrulous. The choice is presented with professional mercy, that tender calculus that emancipates the decider while branding them with the consequence. 8% is not 0. 8% is not mercy either. It is a cliff edge with a railing made of stories where someone lived. Eleanor inventories the cost of failure and finds it indistinguishable from the cost of not trying. The percentage shrinks, then sharpens. A path appears where maps claimed only white space. Paper adds cruelty to clinical truth. Line items convert suffering to currency, as if morality were best understood with a subtotal. Surgery, post-op, neonatal support for canines, not yet born but already expensive. Eleanor imagines the ring she still wears sliding across glass, the whisper of goodbye trapped in its oval. A camper van sits in a garage like a paused horizon, a road trip frozen in amber since the man who promised it no longer speaks in future tense. She sees the broker's desk, the appraisal's indifference to anniversaries. Money will not behave, never has, never will. But it will move if pushed hard enough by love and shame and the need to make the universe blink first. The paper trembles only because the hand holding it remembers funerals. Somewhere in the clinic, a dog whines. Somewhere in town, a cash register chirps. The world insists on its parallel economies.
Hospital paint remembers decades of winter coats. A younger Eleanor lies tilted toward Destiny's paperwork, blood pressure handwriting itself in erratic cursive. Preeclampsia blooms like an unwanted flower. The doctor narrates choices as if they were separate rooms when they are, in fact, the same room with different lighting. A husband squeezes her fingers until aspirin white crescents appear on the skin. A nurse, someone else's Eleanor, places a cool cloth with the authority of small mercies. The clock announces a minute that will never finish ending. The word viable rearranges its letters and becomes survivor, singular. A body lives, a daughter doesn't. The silence that followed learned to mime laughter well enough to pass in public. The memory opens its fist now and drops its stone into present tense. Juno breathes next door. 6 heartbeats flicker on a black and white sea. The past requests an answer. The present prepares a reply that may cost everything. Some choices do not happen once. They reverberate, skimming decades like flat stones on a river. Eleanor signs paperwork without theatricality because grief has already taught her that ceremony belongs to endings, not beginnings. The pen scratches a small funder into hospital air. Consent, informed and muscular, becomes a bridge across a night that would prefer surrender. She hears the first decision mirrored inside this one, the refusal to let silence write the final paragraph. The room recalibrates around a woman who has reframed what future means. Isaac nods with the respect of a craftsman entrusted with a cathedral made of flesh. Money will be found, pain will be allotted, blood will be borrowed and returned as best as bodies can manage. The decision lands in her bones and turns on a light in rooms she boarded up years ago. Outside, plows move snow like the earth changing its mind.
Cell towers carry arguments the way winter carries sound, clean and unimpeded. Caroline's voice arrives armored, a city's worth of certainty behind each syllable. Logic inventories the risks and indicts the heart for trespassing. Budget lines are offered like sheltering walls, but love does not live comfortably in spreadsheets. Eleanor listens to the concern hiding inside the verdict. Here's the child who learned to equate control with safety. Here's herself teaching that lesson by accident through years of competent stoicism. The kitchen where Caroline stands is warm. The clinic where Eleanor sits pretends warmth with thermostats. Words like irresponsible and future walk through the conversation wearing expensive coats. A pause opens wide enough for both to see inside it. The call lands in a stalemate that tastes of old holidays. Eleanor sits very still until the silence becomes breathable again. Juno sleeps, both unaware and central. The surgery remains scheduled, so does the love. Neon is a kind of winter, humming and indifferent. The ring on the velvet square is a moon that once dictated tides, now merely a rock cut into obedience. The broker's scale claims objectivity, ignoring anniversaries it did not attend. Eleanor watches 30 years compress into a number and decides not to feel insulted by arithmetic. Metal slides across glass, and an era ends without confetti. In the window, a television shouts about discounts, a parade of items people once convinced themselves were necessary. Outside, a bus exhales. A teenager laughs. A crow rehearses complaint. Life continues with its usual talent for failing to notice sacrifices. Cash becomes folded heat in Eleanor's pocket, both too heavy and not enough. The van title changes hands later with less ceremony than the original purchase. Paperwork invents closure, but grief keeps an extra key. The ring leaves her finger. The vow enlarges. The night approves nothing yet.
Rooms hold their temperature of absence. Dust keeps minutes better than clocks. Eleanor moves through the house counting not objects but ghosts, each photograph a witness refusing cross-examination. The dining table remembers the weight of elbows and plan-making. Now it carries a ledger of costs, post-its like small flags marking battles to come. She lists reserves and contingencies the way a field commander surveys a ridgeline. The refrigerator hums a neutral anthem. A sweater still carrying her husband's shape surrenders from a closet shelf into a donation bag that feels like betrayal and relief, braided together. Overhead, the light flickers the same way her resolve does, briefly, then steadies. She writes the final sum, circles it, and rehearses the conversation where she will pretend money is a puzzle, not a weather system. The house exhales as she locks the door. Sometimes leaving is the only way a place can become home again. Fluorescent dawn meets ink with the quiet ceremony of mountains accepting snow. Paper accepts signature as if born for this intimacy. Eleanor's hand does not shake because the tremor belongs to a different era. Isaac witnesses in the legal way and the human way, initials anchoring the moment to the wider architecture of care. The consent form is both shield and sword, delimiting risk, authorizing the incision that will transform fate from theory to scar. Monitors prepare their vocabulary, anesthesia calibrates its mercy, steel waits in cloth. Juno's eyes open to a slit of brown, the color of November rivers, unstartled, unafraid, perhaps because animals understand inevitability better than people do. In the hallway, a coffee cup cools beside a stack of journals reporting triumphs and failures with equal elegance. The day steps forward and does not look back. The door to the operating suite accepts them without commentary. The air changes temperature and meaning.
The clock above the nurse's station refuses to accelerate, its red second hand looping like a tether around Eleanor's throat. The waiting room insists on practical upholstery, the pattern designed to camouflage spilled coffee and sudden grief. She threads Tom's rosary through her fingers, not to bargain, but to measure breath, each bead a shoreline she can put her feet on. Behind the double doors, the antiseptic weather changes. Gowned constellations move in orbital paths around a single sleeping body. Consent becomes anesthesia. Anesthesia becomes a silence curated by machines. Paper cups cool into defeat. She tries reading and discovers every noun has migrated to a place she cannot reach. In the glass, she sees herself in profile, a map annotated with winters. Outside, dawn rehearses its entrance along the ridge, pale and embarrassed. Somewhere in this building, 6 embryonic tides keep time against the authoritarian metronome of the tumor. Vigil is a muscle. She refuses to let it cramp. Lamps bloom above the table like unflinching suns, their halos clarifying the borders of every necessary violence. Instruments lie in ranked silver, precise as verdicts. Blue drapes frame a battlefield the size of a chest and neck, a nation reduced to the acreage of survival. Isaac's voice takes its place among the machines, cadence level, lungs and hands agreeing on tempo. Monitors translate life into green script, a lyric without metaphor. The incision opens not only tissue, but also a passage where will and skill can meet without flinching. Vessels declare themselves with the honesty of color. Clamps reply with order. The tumor shows its perimeter like a king that mistook growth for rule. Dissection argues sovereignty back to the body that owns it. Nurses trade instruments with a fluency that makes language seem redundant. Outside the door,
the world continues ignoring miracles expertly. Inside, light refuses to blink, and so does everyone within it.
Time abandons its usual grammar and chooses geology. Minutes sediment into layers of rumor. Hours tilt and buckle under unseen pressure. The waiting room's aquarium becomes theology, fish repeating liturgy in slow, luminous loops. Eleanor counts backwards from childhood to keep panic domesticated. She lands in summers of clipped lawns and a bike with white handlebar tassels, then in winters where her mother's hands smelled faintly of bread and bleach. The present repeatedly intrudes, a kind of hail against glass. She gets up, sits down, walks to the restroom, reroutes her own reflection with steady contempt. Nurses pass moving small weather fronts of competence. A family celebrates a newborn with whispers that sound like wind through pine. A gurney squeaks, indifferent to destination. 6 hours stretch, then snap, then stretch again, a rubber band refusing to choose between usefulness and failure. Somewhere inside the lighted room, a decision inches forward. The rosary warms to her skin. The doors part and release a woman who brings the climate of another city with her. Coat that implies taxis, heels that argue with tile, a phone still waking from airplane mode. Caroline hesitates in the threshold as if air itself might extract a toll. The room curates their reunion without commentary. 2 chairs, 3 apart, a table with magazines that have not learned new months, a vending machine that prays to exact change. Conversation takes the shape of weather alerts she wishes existed for lives. Track this storm, avoid this frontage road, stock batteries for this specific darkness. Between sentences, old holidays unpack themselves and stand in the corners uninvited. Caroline's eyes inventory the place for someone to blame and land repeatedly on the laws of physics. In their shared silence, an elevator dings with either good or bad news, neither of which arrives. The clock rehearses impartiality. The doors to the OR remain closed, deliberately neutral.
The light above the door winks to a color that lets breath back into the building. Isaac appears dilated by hours and responsibility, mask folded into his palm like a diffused alarm. The edges of exhaustion on his face are mathematical, calculable, deserved. Words line up in correct order. Successful resection, controlled bleeding, limb taken to spare life, recovery uncertain but real. The phrase, "she's still with us," lands like warm bread on a table that forgot hunger could be met. In Eleanor's body, every tendon loosens at once, a quiet riot moving outward from the sternum. Caroline nods as if verdict should always have been favorable, yet her shoulders confess a calendar's worth of fear. In the recovery room, machines author a lullaby in green and soft beeps. The body that was invaded negotiates a new treaty with its remaining parts. 8% decides to act like a door, not a wall. Ultrasound dark blooms into a small universe, the transducers sketching constellations that refuse nihilism. 6 pulses interrupt the black, each a comet refusing eclipse. Gel shines like a minor miracle on taut skin, notched with bandage shadows. The room softens into reverent industry, even the printer whispering as if volumes could harm. Eleanor reads the screen the way sailors read stars, navigation disguised as awe. The syllables of developmental milestones return from the recesses of her training. Gestational age, viability windows, growth curves. She keeps translating to human. Heartbeat equals will. Movement equals future. 6 equals not alone. In Juno's breathing, there is a measured defiance, a metronome set to survive.
Isaac documents measurements that will later function as alibis for Hope. Outside, wind scrapes the eaves with fingernails of ice. Inside, a chorus of tiny insistences composes a counter-argument against every pragmatic exit the mind suggests.
Heat rises under bandages like a long repressed argument. Monitors adjust their syntax to urgency. A line of green becomes a tightrope. The word infection unwraps its thorns. The room's temperature feels falsified, warm air insufficient against a warfare happening at scale too small for vision. Antibiotics drip their translucent petitions into a vein that trembles. Eleanor sits sentinel, eyes refusing to blink long enough to miss a single fluctuation. She tells stories without speaking, a liturgy delivered via pulse at her wrist pressed gently to Juno's paw. A tray rattles somewhere, a door exclaims and then apologizes. Isaac's posture condenses into focus, decisions nested inside decisions like Russian dolls you open until you find either mercy or math. Night collects against the glass in thick folds. Fever climbs anyway. The body is a country both invaded and defending, its soldiers microscopic and unforgiving. Eleanor vows to outstare the dark, then proves it. At 2 in the morning, numbers abandon politeness. The temperature posts a figure that tastes of copper. Oxygen saturation dips with theatrical spite. Eleanor feels the room tip, not physically, but morally, as if gravity itself were deliberating. The ventilatory assist hisses its pared-down comfort, an artificial tide the body agrees to ride for now. Isaac pivots to contingency algorithms that have slept loaded for hours. Time shrinks to the exact length of an inhalation, then expands into an emptiness where prayer tries on new clothes. In her mind, Eleanor opens the door to a small room she locked long ago. Inside, promises she thought she failed, the name she never spoke aloud for the child who left before language. She stands there with them, a citizen returning to a country that exiled her. When she returns to the bright present, the line on the monitor has modestly resumed obedience. Fever hesitates. The night holds its breath.
First light rinses the windows with diluted gold, a tincture mixed by mountains. Numbers drift back toward civility, decimal places surrendering their threats. Juno's chest discovers a slower choreography, as if someone reset a metronome a room over. Nurses conduct the return to ordinary with professional atheism, no miracles admitted, only protocols fulfilled. Eleanor allows herself to claim superstition for an hour and names it gratitude instead. Coffee tastes like something grown on another planet and ferried here by a smuggler. Still, it warms. Isaac permits a corner of his mouth to confess relief. In the silence that follows alarm, every small sound becomes a hymn. The click of a pen, the sigh of tape sealing a dressing, the rustle of a blanket negotiating with air. Sun draws a rectangle of domestic light on the floor. Eleanor steps into it and finds she still fits. Outside, the snow pretends innocence. Inside, dawn certifies reprieve. The harness looks like a contraption built by a cautious angel. Straps cradle balance where anatomy has been redrawn. Juno contemplates floor distance the way climbers regard their first holds, alert to gravity's opinions. Eleanor sets her body into the posture of belief and becomes a moving handrail. The first shift upward is a vote. Muscles renegotiate their job descriptions. A forelimb stumps once, twice. Tremor becomes motion. Motion becomes a sentence that refuses period. Collapse intrudes and is not catastrophe, just a comma where breath is collected. Applause does not belong here, quiet does. On the third attempt, the room length compresses to a possibility, and Juno crosses it with an awkwardness that reads as magnificence. Eleanor's eyes fill not from sentiment, but from the mathematic satisfaction of proof. The harness is removed like a metal no one will polish. Gravity concedes a fraction of territory. A future adds a stair, and then another.
The forecast arrives as scripture. Isobars packed tight as ribs. blue swaths scything across the map like handwriting from a stern ancestor. Radios practice their solemnity, the meteorologist translating distance into dread. Terms escalate: whiteout, wind chill. Feet, not inches. The clinic inventories generators, fuel, blankets, resigned snacks. Juno's restlessness writes an addendum, belly low and taut, breath punctuated by the instinct to make a nest where tile misrepresents earth. Eleanor reviews supply lists with a nurse's superstition. If prepared thoroughly enough, catastrophe will be shamed into choosing another county. The town outside behaves like someone bracing a shoulder against a heavy door. Headlines rediscover the word historic and overuse it kindly. Isaac studies both the sky and charts, pairing barometric pressure with fetal heartbeats as if they shared a grammar. Somewhere in the building, a space heater clicks on like a votive. Snow begins without ceremony, each flake a whispered rehearsal of siege. Blankets rearrange under teeth that would prefer dirt. Forepaws work elliptical patterns, drawing invisible boundaries around a chosen center. Juno's eyes move from corner to corner, measuring risk in square footage, the way wildness draws a circle and declares it sacred. Eleanor pads the space with towels warmed in a dryer that hums like an agreeable elder. Isaac checks temperature with a precision usually reserved for dicier surgeries, yet here it feels like midwifery disguised as medicine. Appetite declines according to an ancient script. Thirst revises itself into short, determined sips. The building seems to lean in, ductwork and drywall attempting intimacy. Outside, the storm stacks its arguments. Snow thickens. Wind practices a vocabulary not used on polite days. Contractions present as a ripple under fur, subtle as a thought becoming decision. The nest is ready, not by aesthetic, but by function. A low red glow defining borders. Breath shortens into countdown.
The first flicker is a shrug. The second is a warning. Then the building exhales into darkness, a great organism deciding to sleep without permission. For a beat, the silence contains everything. Machines paused like mid-sentence, footsteps reconsidering destinations, hearts rehearsing improvisation. The generator coughs awake and establishes a palette. Fewer lights, lower heat, essential circuits only. The clinic shrinks to core functions like a ship closing watertight doors. Heat lamps hold their red islands stubbornly, sanctuaries where small lives will refuse the blizzard its casualty list. Eleanor counts plugs and sockets, rationing as if hope itself requires amperage, which tonight it does. Isaac moves like someone who has practiced this dance with past winters, calm as a metronome. Outside, the storm knocks on everything with unanimous knuckles. Inside, battery-powered lanterns cast faces into campfire myths. The outage becomes an extra character, sulking but manageable. Labor answers back. It will not wait for weather. The body composes focus with a craft older than memory. Waves translate pain into purpose, each tightening an argument that insists on arrival. Juno pants in calculated rhythms, a veteran athlete entering the interval set that decides medals. Eleanor kneels into her own history and finds competence waiting uncomplainingly. Towels accumulate near her like obedient clouds. The heat lamp washes the enclosure in a red that suggests heart interiors. The blizzard interrogates the windows. Glass holds. Isaac monitors without colonizing the moment, a respectful officiant guarding thresholds. Scent shifts. Metal of blood. Cereal's sweet colostrum. Something wild and not at all tragic. The first sack crowns. Glistening, impossible, and ordinary. Hands do what eons have taught them. The room narrows until only breath, pressure, release remain. Outside, plows argue with drifts and lose, then win, then lose again. Inside, a new sound learns to be louder than the storm without raising its voice.
Counting begins quietly. 1, alive and noisy. 2, alive and hungry. The third arrives blue and uncommitted to the project of breathing. Time collapses into a lens. All peripheral narrative blurs. Isaac takes the body no heavier than a sentence and rubs it into friction, a prayer translated into physics. Eleanor listens to the universe decide between silence and cry, a binary older than speech. 30 seconds fold into 30 more, the margin narrow as a blade's kindness. Somewhere, a circuit clicks back to life. A heater resumes its monologue. In the center of the red-lit world, the small chest stutters, then inflates, a bellows learning employment. Sound tears itself free of water and announces its existence with a grievance. The room forgives the storm for a moment. Juno receives the returned child and resumes the work that will populate the hour with survivors. Eleanor wipes her face and discovers the storm has moved indoors. By 4 in the morning, a constellation wriggles at the center of the nest. 2 black as new ink, 2 with tan masks like small bandits, 1 pale as winter wheat, 1 carrying the stubbornness of the runt determined to be last, only in order. The heat lamp renders their slick bodies into gemstones. Juno circles once, twice, then settles into the geometry that optimizes milk and warmth and watching. The storm loses an argument with fatigue and drops into a lower growl. Eleanor counts again and again as if numbers could guarantee remaining. Isaac's shoulders unspool 1 vertebra at a time. Somewhere, a staff member cries in a supply closet and returns with eyes calmer. The generator holds a rhythm. Breath establishes monarchy. The blizzard outside blurs the world to a single address. This room, this nest, this hour. 6 lives root and claim. Eleanor hears in their synchronized swallowing the sound of a door unlatching.
Morning finds its way into a lens before it reaches the windows. Mara's phone trembles the way truth does when it first leaves the mouth. The 30-second video edits itself. Red glow, the dog's triangular ear, the pile of impossibly new, and old woman asleep on a cot with her hand resting on a rib cage that learned to live yesterday. Captions supply math and miracle. Hashtags sow threads between strangers at continental scale. The upload blooms like frost patterns, fractal branching across timelines that otherwise deliver gossip and sales. Notifications rise in a tide that refuses shore. Comments invent a chorus that swings between hymnal and courtroom. Donations prove that guilt and hope share a wallet. The clinic's inbox becomes a minor disaster area. The story outruns its narrators and starts telling itself, which is how stories choose immortality. Inside the room, the oxygen smells faintly of milk. The puppies do not register fame, only warmth. Numbers sprint where they previously trudged. A stranger in Toledo sets a goal without permission. The internet multiplies it into something resembling restitution. 47 becomes a motif donors can hold like a talisman, each contribution a stone thrown back at indifference. Staff gather around a laptop as if it were a hearth, faces washed blue by the light of rapidly adjusting totals. The clinic's accountant drafts contingency plans at a speed that alarms even her. Eleanor watches the scroll of names and small notes. Lost my mother last year, for my dog who saved me, for the one who stopped. The money undoes knots she did not know were tied. It also breeds a new anxiety that resources might pour in for the spectacle and not for the quiet months after, when heroism is the daily management of bowls and bandages. Still, the flood is warm. Isaac allows himself a slow inhale that tastes like margins.
A local camera arrives with the weather still frozen to its casing. The lens studies the room as if trying to learn manners. Eleanor sits where the light behaves best. under signage designed for compliance, not confession. Questions are soft-edged, but carry the weight of a nation humming, "Tell us why." She narrates snow and silence, arrested tag, the moment a tale attempted forgiveness. She does not say hero. She says necessary. In playback, her voice surprises her. Older, yes, but steadier than the architecture deserves. Across the town, televisions frame her between crawl text and advertisements for trucks that can conquer anything but grief. Comments bloom like algae, bright and choking in equal measure. The interview lives life she cannot supervise, traveling farther than some families ever reconcile. In the kennel, Juno licks a newborn ear. The clip will land in bedrooms and boardrooms and buses and in line at pharmacies. Somewhere, someone decides to stop. The internet bends its knees and pronounces. Praise arrives carrying flowers and blind spots. Condemnation arrives with spreadsheets and cold math that mistakes future for certainty. What about people? What about bills? What about the day after the camera leaves? Eleanor learns to step sideways through opinions as if moving across a stream using stones that wobble but hold. The donations become not an absolution but a contract she intends to honor in long, unbroadcast hours. Isaac blocks comments on the clinic's page after midnight because sleep is also medicine. Mara disables notifications and still dreams in ping. In the parking lot, plows finally win the argument with drifts. The town reappears in outlines. Inside, Juno and 6 lives occupy a geography smaller than outrage and larger than policy. Judgment persists outside the class. Inside, milk lets down. Breath matches breath. And the moral mathematics reduces to something the hands can do now.
Midday carries a different kind of chill. The antiseptic corridor breathes frost into its own shadow. A man enters, posture collapsing around his ribs as if shame itself has mass. Richard Kane smells of unwashed time, eyes orbiting without center. The receptionist freezes halfway through her greeting. "I'm here about the shepherd," he says, voice hoarse enough to suggest sleepless months. Isaac appears at once, stance protective by habit. The air between the men curdles with unspoken files and photographs. Eleanor watches from the threshold, recognition without context, tightening the air. Richard's fingers twitch toward invisible leashes, then drop. Silence performs its autopsy on him. The confession begins not as narrative, but as tremor. Syllables crawling out of dehydration. He speaks of commands misheard, of a badge revoked, of whiskey as apology. Juno stirs behind the glass, hackles uncertain. The moment gathers weight. Past and present clasp hands like adversaries briefly unsure of their feud. Words tumble into coherence the way debris settles after an explosion. Richard's tone falters between testimony and self-indictment. The night of the pursuit, sirens like wolves, adrenaline conducting him until thought became percussion. The suspect, a boy, unarmed. The command, attack. Juno refused. He shouted again, and she refused again. The gunfire that followed rewrote his life into fragments. Partner wounded, career shredded by inquiries that required scapegoats. He drank, raged, starved the dog he blamed for his collapse. The tumor grew where cruelty lingered longest. His voice splinters, but he doesn't cry. The body's too dehydrated for that currency. Isaac listens, expression neutralized by years of necessary restraint. Eleanor feels the narrative land in her bloodstream as poison and antidote simultaneously. Richard's hands open empty. "I left her there," he says. The sentence has no punctuation, only breath failing. The room holds its verdict a second longer before mercy asks to be considered.
Eleanor steps forward, every footfall deliberate, a rhythm older than forgiveness. The air tastes of iron and disinfectant, a sacrament for mortals. She stops close enough to see the veins trembling at Richard's temple. "You don't get to apologize and walk away," she says quietly, voice calibrated to scalpels. "She bled for your failures." His eyes close, a reflex more protective than prayer. He mutters that he knows, that the word sorry has become a ruined currency. Eleanor studies the wreckage of a man and recognizes architecture familiar to her own collapses. Different wars, same aftermath. "You don't get forgiveness," she adds, softer. "You get work." The phrase strikes like a gavel. Juno watches from her crate, nostrils flaring, tail still. Recognition flickers, not affection, not yet. Richard nods once, the motion of someone surrendering without expecting parole. The door opens to let him leave, but he stays until told. Punishment, this time, is to remain conscious. Later, they sit in Isaac's office surrounded by the paperwork of compassion, forms, donations, treatment plans. Eleanor dictates her terms: therapy, sobriety, restitution in the currency of care. "Sponsor a life, don't own it." Richard nods through the tremor. Isaac outlines a referral network for men who mistake authority for immunity. Outside, a snowmelt drip counts seconds down the gutter. Juno sleeps in the next room, ear twitching occasionally at the unfamiliar voice. Richard signs a sheet committing to treatment and contribution. The act feels smaller than its intention, yet heavier than his wrist can comfortably manage. Eleanor watches ink dry and wonders how many signatures it takes to change a species. When he leaves, she exhales a weather front's worth of tension. Mercy, she learns, doesn't erase. It repurposes. The clinic lights dim into evening protocol. Somewhere inside her, an ache rearranges itself into something usable.
A week later, Lena Wynne stands in Eleanor's doorway, arms full of cardboard memory. Dust releases its ghost upward as boxes settle on the table. Journals, photographs, veterinary receipts, the paper trail of a life both tender and documented. Eleanor opens the top journal and inhales a perfume of lavender and pen ink. Olivia Wynne's handwriting slopes like an old garden wall. Gentle decline, steady faith. Entries list feeding times, medication dosages, and small miracles. Juno detected my sugar drop again. She barked me awake before the panic attack. Then come the letters, one addressed to whoever loves her next. Lena reads aloud, voice fracturing into apology. The letter names Juno, guardian angel in fur. The words, "forgive in advance." Eleanor's throat tightens around recognition. The dog was born into service, trained to witness weakness and respond. Loyalty wasn't naivety, it was vocation. The past clarifies, the present grows humbler. Both women cry as quietly as professionalism allows. Night stretches thin around the lamplight pooling over Olivia's journal. Eleanor traces a sentence. "She waits for me even when I don't return right away." The phrase reconfigures every behavior she's witnessed. The way Juno flinched from Mem, the watchfulness mistaken for fear, the endless patience. The dog had been doing her job long after employers had abandoned her. Training became faith. Faith became survival. The tumor, Eleanor realizes, is less an aberration than an inheritance from years of vigilance that had nowhere safe to rest. She imagines the cell mutations as tiny soldiers refusing retirement. The thought is absurd, healing, terrible. Across the room, Juno stirs, nose twitching as if sensing being read.
Eleanor whispers, "You did everything right." The dog's eyes open, amber under the desk light, and hold her until words feel redundant. Understanding, once achieved, is a kind of mourning.
Morning arrives in a blue so brittle it could snap. Lena pours coffee that tastes of resolve. Together, they draft a plan that pretends to be logistics, but is, in truth, penance. Each puppy will be trained for service, 6 small ambassadors continuing the covenant Olivia began. Names become blessings: Echo, Astra, Valor, Sable, Nova, Hope, each a syllable of repair. Funding spreadsheets fill, applications to certification programs queue. Isaac agrees to oversee veterinary clearances. Eleanor adds hand-knit blankets for each, threads interlaced with hair she's beginning to lose from stress before diagnosis even formalizes. They sign nothing, but behave as if signatures have been exchanged. Outside, snowdrops spear through soil, ignorant of human dramas. Inside, 2 women build an altar of paperwork and tea mugs. When they finish, Juno presses her head against Eleanor's thigh with the authority of purpose acknowledged. Somewhere, a future rearranges itself more kindly. Pain begins as background static, the sort you ignore until silence makes it audible. At first, she attributes it to fatigue, to crouching too long near kennels, to weather. Then the ache sharpens, a violin note cutting through rehearsal chatter. In the mirror, her skin looks borrowed, pallor humming at the edges. She sits in her car outside the grocery store and cannot remember what she came for. Time disassembles into breaths, errands abandoned mid-aisle. When she finally tells Isaac, it sounds like an apology. Tests follow, blood drawn, images taken, jargon revisited from a different side of the desk. The diagnosis arrives wrapped in euphemism. Stage 2, operable, prognosis favorable with immediate treatment. The word immediate sticks like a burr. She looks at Juno sleeping on the floor beside her chair, one paw twitching toward dream landscapes, and feels the arithmetic of survival rewrite itself. She has fought too many times to misinterpret a summons.
Hospital corridors have their own weather, recycled air, echo, disinfectant as top note. Eleanor listens to the oncologist delineate options like roads radiating from the same vanishing point. Words overlap: chemotherapy, laparoscopic, recovery window. She understands them all, having delivered them once to others. Now they feel carnivorous. She asks how long she can wait, meaning how long before duty disintegrates into selfishness. The doctor's answer, weeks, translates to not long enough to prepare everyone. Outside, snowmelt plays percussion on the gutters. Inside, metal instruments gleam in trays. She touches the scar on her hand from Juno's first surgery day, a geography she trusts more than charts. Cancer is an old adversary that speaks the dialect of persistence. She intends to out-talk it. Still, when she drives home, the steering wheel feels heavier, as though gravity has joined the opposition. Juno's gaze in the rearview mirror acts as compass and demand. The phone becomes confession booth. Caroline's reaction begins as anger and ends as command. I'm flying out. Daniel follows 12 hours later, quieter, offering logistics instead of disbelief. Their arrival converts the small house into a crowded miracle. Suitcases line the hallway like punctuation marks in a run-on prayer. Conversations orbit diagnosis, then veer to weather, then circle back because avoidance fails its duty. Caroline calculates treatment schedules. Daniel fixes the porch light. At dinner, Juno rests her head on Eleanor's knee, reminding everyone that survival is a shared project. Old resentments blink under the tablecloth like pilot lights. By evening, laughter intrudes, startled by its own relevance. The family forms a temporary treaty, signed in soup bowls and exhaustion. Outside, February thickens its breath against the windows. Inside, purpose reheats itself. The house, once mausoleum, becomes triage center for hope.
After surgery, anesthesia recedes and ripples, carrying pieces of dream shoreline with it. Eleanor surfaces to a ceiling grid she could map blindfolded. Pain asserts jurisdiction, dull but persuasive. Through the window, winter smears its face against glass, begging to be recognized. Tubes annotate her body in fluent medical shorthand. The world narrows to beeps that alternate between accusation and reassurance. She turns her head, slowly, toward the empty chair where Juno should be. The absence hurts sharper than the incision. Nurses murmur efficient sympathy, unaware that solitude can become a physiological insult. She presses her palm against the bedsheet, tracing an imaginary fur pattern, and waits for the drugs to dilute despair into something breathable. Outside, the horizon performs indifference perfectly. Inside, she rehearses the next breath until it sounds like intention. Technology intervenes where policy hesitates. Caroline's phone screen fills with Isaac's hand framing Juno's face. The dog leans toward the lens, ears cocked at the strange echo of familiar voice. Eleanor's heart rate, sluggish from medication, quickens. Monitors confirm, nurses whisper. Disbelief rearranges itself into protocol notes. Juno whines, a soft frequency that threads through hospital noise and stitches something invisible back together. "I'm still here," Eleanor says. The dog answers by settling, chin on paws, eyes locked. For an hour, they share silence, two creatures tethered by pixels and persistence. The ICU nurse, pragmatic atheist of miracles, watches vital signs stabilize and says nothing. When the call ends, the monitor hums a rhythm newly confident. Medicine documents correlation. Eleanor calls it faith updated for broadband. In the morning, the doctor remarks on unexpected improvement. She smiles and credits better Wi-Fi. The truth is simpler. Presence travels faster than dosage.
Back at the clinic, Juno mirrors Eleanor's regimen: antibiotics, monitored diet, gradual walks. Two bodies, one narrative of scar tissue learning flexibility. Isaac keeps a chart for each, identical grids annotated by species. Caroline visits daily, toggling between hospital and kennel like a commuter between continents. Progress notes accumulate small victories: appetite restored, temperature stable, humor returning. The comparison becomes family folklore. Even the nurses conspire to keep scores. On day 7, Eleanor sits upright for breakfast as Juno takes her first steps outside without assistance. Both collapse afterward into naps that look identical. Recovery, Eleanor realizes, isn't linear. It's choreography across distance. Each improvement feels like an answered letter. The doctors call it coincidence. She calls it duet. By the end of the week, both patient and dog demand more food and less pity. Science remains skeptical. Faith nods, takes notes, and schedules tomorrow. Progress brings unintended consequences. Distance. Hospital discharge lags. Clinic routines accelerate. Juno begins refusing meals, pacing until her stitches strain. Isaac notes psychosomatic distress, writes it on the chart, then crosses it out because love isn't in diagnostic manuals. Meanwhile, Eleanor's nights grow brittle. She dreams of kennels echoing without her. The phone fills with updates, none satisfying. She tells Caroline she feels haunted by a presence that isn't absence, but misplacement. The staff attempts lullabies of reassurance. None modulate the pitch of missing. By the third day, both patient and dog record fevers. Mild, coincidental,
Data insists. The human heart disagrees. Isaac requests a 1-hour supervised visit, citing experimental therapy. Bureaucracy hesitates, then yields, curious to test the physics of devotion. The appointment is set for dawn. Eleanor sleeps in fragments, pulse sinking unconsciously with a rhythm miles away. The morning promises either miracle or paperwork.
The service elevator opens onto concrete washed in sodium light. Cold air rushes in first, then sound. A crate being lowered, wheels squeaking protest. Juno peers through slats, head lifting as if scent alone had restored the world's order. Eleanor waits in a wheelchair, IV pole listing like a mast. When Isaac unlatches the door, the dog moves with three-legged precision, then stops, trembling not from weakness but disbelief. "Hey girl," Eleanor whispers, the phrase tearing down every protocol. Juno crosses the last feet slowly, then collapses into the offered lap, weight rediscovering its meaning. Monitors in a nearby room record the echo, Eleanor's vitals recalibrating in real time. The hour passes without notice. When the handlers separate them, both bodies resist, but permission ends when miracles become liabilities. 12 hours later, both fevers break. Science updates its notes again. Love stays unpeer-reviewed, but observable. Within days, appetite returns, first to Juno, then to Eleanor. Energy composes itself from scattered atoms of determination. Hair loss accelerates. Humor compensates. Eleanor names each bald patch after a mountain peak, a cartography of resilience. Juno graduates from short walks to full circuits of the yard, gait unsteady but joyous. Visitors comment on resemblance, two survivors reclaiming oxygen with the same stubborn dignity. Caroline, notebook in hand, documents progress for some undefined future essay, while Daniel repairs the fence that never quite kept anything in or out. Isaac observes from a respectful distance, scribbling phrases that might later appear in a lecture about interspecies healing, then crossing them out because they sound sentimental. Evenings stretch longer, sunlight lingers like an overdue apology. When Juno curls at Eleanor's feet, breathing rhythmic and certain, the woman feels her own heartbeat settle into the same tempo. Strength, she decides, isn't regained, it's adopted.
March arrives with mud and cautious optimism. Chemotherapy sessions contract in number, but not intensity. The clinic's staff now follow Eleanor's progress as faithfully as they chart Juno's. During the last infusion, she closes her eyes and imagines snow melting from rooftops, water finding drains with stubborn grace. Her hand holds a photograph. 6 puppies grown into distinct futures, Echo beside a child, Valor beside a soldier, Hope beside her own shadow. Needles and drips fade into background percussion. The nurse adjusts flow rate, unaware she is conducting a symphony of ending chapters. When the bag empties, Eleanor thanks the chemicals for their cruelty and their competence. Outside, robins rehearse return. She walks, slower than habit, to the clinic, where Juno waits at the window, tail drumming a code only they understand. Stay, fight, arrive. The horizon bends toward warmer things. The envelope weighs less than its significance. Caroline sits beside her mother in the oncologist's office, both pretending patience. The doctor smiles, an expression calibrated for cautious joy, and says the phrase that detonates quiet, no evidence of disease. Words so clean they leave residue. Caroline laughs first, then cries into her own hands, discovering they still smell faintly of antiseptic and dog. The doctor speaks of maintenance schedules, follow-ups, percentages, but the room has shifted key. Outside, clouds uncurl into new shapes. Eleanor feels space expanding inside her ribs, an architecture remodeled by gratitude. She texts Isaac. Clear.
he replies with a single exclamation point, professional restraint barely intact. Back home, she kneels beside Juno, whispers, "We did it." The dog answers with the kind of sigh that could pass for prayer. Later, under lamplight, Eleanor writes a single sentence in her journal. Survival is a duet performed without rehearsal.
May smells of thawed earth and second chances. The van from the clinic pulls into her driveway and Juno steps out, three-legged grace perfected. Hope bounds beside her, all pause and possibility. The house, freshly painted by volunteer hands, waits with its windows open like lungs rediscovering air. Inside, beds prepared, hers, Juno's, the pups. Embroidered names like stitched affirmations. Caroline hovers, pretending not to cry. Daniel records on his phone, pretending documentation is duty, not devotion. Juno explores every room, knows cataloging absence and replacing it with presence. When she finally settles beside the bed, her body performs the act of belonging with professional precision. That night, Eleanor wakes briefly, heart startled by quiet. The house no longer echoes. It breathes. Outside, frogs begin their season's chorus. Inside, three heartbeats synchronize. The story that started on frozen asphalt ends here, warm as forgiveness. January again, the Walmart lot reborn into memorial ground. A small crowd clusters under gray sky. The plaque gleams against snow. Compassion changed everything. Cameras hum softly, breath fogs in unison. Isaac speaks of statistics transfigured into lives. Lena of legacy, Caroline of reconciliation. Then Eleanor steps forward, silver hair uncovered, voice carrying the timbre of earned authority. 47 people walked past, she says. One stopped. That's all it takes to turn survival into story. Applause spills, restrained by reverence. From the crowd, Juno walks forward wearing her therapy vest, Hope trotting beside her. The dog rests her head against Eleanor's knee, pose of loyalty refined into art. Snow begins its quiet encore. Somewhere among the spectators, Richard stands, sober and silent, holding the leash of valor, the PTSD service dog he sponsors. No one points. No one needs to. The moment completes its circle. The world, for one breath, listens.